Afternoon. Hi, I'm Roger Hartley, and I'm Dean of the College of Public Affairs. And I just wanted to welcome our students, our faculty, our staff, and our guests to our second of our incredible series, Voices of Public Service, second of this semester. We are absolutely thrilled to continue this series, which began back in spring 2022. And it is part of our William Donald Schaefer Center for Public Policy and co-sponsored by the College of Public Affairs and also our terrific Career and Internship Center at the University of Baltimore's campus. The series, just in brief, is designed for students. It's designed as an opportunity to hear from a public, nonprofit, or private sector leader who has done significant work that we want to honor in public service. But beyond honoring the work and the career of the individual that speaks with us, it's really an opportunity for our students, to learn about the career of a public leader, how careers change, what their motivation for public service is and was, and also an opportunity for you to ask questions as well. One of the things that I wanted to start out with, and I always start out with before I turn it over to Dr. Ann Cotton, is just as a reminder, the way these events work is Dr. Cotton and I interview our guest. And then afterwards, we really encourage you throughout to use the question and answer function at the very bottom of our webinar to pose questions that we can ask our guest today. So at any time, go ahead during this event and put in questions. And certainly after the interview is finished, you can enter in questions as well, but use the Q&A and not the chat. Dr. Cotton, before we introduce our speaker and guest today, would you like to say a few words?
Yes, thank you, Dean Hartley. Welcome, everyone. I'm the director of Schaefer Center for Public Policy here in the College of Public Affairs, and it's our honor to be sponsoring the Voices of Public Service. This is part of our new initiative, Next Gen Leaders for Public Service, which you'll be hearing a lot more about. The Schaefer Center is an applied research and consulting entity within the College of Public Affairs that focuses on helping governments help people by helping them solve their problems and training the next generation of leaders. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Dean Hartley.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Will, I wanted to say on behalf of President Schmoke and the entire University of Baltimore, I wanted to welcome today Mr. Robert Hur as our guest in Voices of Public Service. Thank you so much for coming today. I wanted to say a few words about our guest and then give him an opportunity after our first question to probably elaborate a little bit on his bio. I will say first that I was so delighted to invite you because I remember just a couple years ago when you were serving as U.S. Attorney for the state of Maryland, that you came to our campus and were part of a major event. And actually it was a big coalition effort that was at our law school, and it was based on fighting the opioid epidemic. And we met through our university Center for Drug Policy and Prevention, of which really holds the Washington-Baltimore high-intensity drug trafficking area. So we've had an opportunity to meet a couple times, and I've just been so impressed with your career, your work in public service, and I enjoyed you personally. So thank you for coming. A little bit about our guest. Robert Hur is a partner in the Washington, D.C. office of Gibson Dunn and Crutcher and is co-chair of the firm's crisis management practice group. He is a seasoned trial lawyer and advocate and brings decades of experience in government and in private sector practice, including service in senior leadership positions with the U.S. Department of Justice, and that also guided companies and individuals who faced white-collar criminal matters. He worked in regulatory proceedings and also enforcement actions, internal investigations, and related other civil litigation. Mr. Hur is a member also of the firm's White Collar Defense and Investigations Practice Group. Prior to joining the firm, however, Mr. Hur served as the 48th U.S. Attorney for the District of Maryland, presidentially appointed and unanimously confirmed by the U.S. Senate. He served from 2018 to 2021 as our Chief Federal Law Enforcement Officer in Maryland, setting strategic priorities and supervising one of the largest and busiest U.S. Attorney's office in the entire nation. Before serving as U.S. Attorney, Mr. Hur served as the Principal Associate Deputy Attorney General with the U.S. Department of Justice in Washington, D.C. from 2017 to 2018. One of the additional reasons we invited Mr. Hur is his career in the Justice Department, as well as his varied legal career in private sector, but especially your service to our state of Maryland as its U.S. Attorney. He received his JD from Stanford Law School, where he served as editor of the Stanford Law Review, was elected to the Order of the Coif, and won the Kirkwood Moot Court competition while in law school as well. And he served as law clerk for former Chief Justice William Rehnquist. With that introduction, I just wanted to again say thank you and welcome to our speaker series, and we're really excited to hear from you today. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Roger and Ann, for having me here. It's really an honor for me, and Roger, thank you for that very kind introduction. I am a huge fan of UBALT, and a big part of that is how seriously UBALT takes its mission of being part of and contributing to the life of the city. At its very best, the university is very, very far removed from being an ivory tower. At its very best, it is actually thinking in very concrete terms about how to make the life of the surrounding community citizens better. And that is something that I know President Schmoke, at the very top, all the way down, takes very, very seriously. So it's a real honor for me to be here today. I remember well the opioid-related event that you're talking about, and that was just, I think that actually is a terrific example of one of the many ways in which UBALT takes very seriously its charter of making life better for everyone in the community around it.
Well, I thank you again for that. That's really inspiring, and it's something that we hope that people think of us at UBALT. We are an engaged institution, an urban institution that tries to educate our students outside the borders of our university and in this magnificent city. So really appreciated that. Ann, do you want to get started with the first question?
Certainly, and I would like to echo Roger's comments. I'm so appreciative of you taking time from your schedule to be here with us today and to let our students see a different side of public service that they may not have had much exposure to, especially the students in the College of Public Affairs. Obviously, our law students know a lot about you and about your career. I wanted to start out by asking what your career in public service has meant to you and why students might want to consider a career in public service.
Sure. Maybe before I dive into that question, I just want to say thank you to all the folks who are tuning in. I wish I could see you on my screen. Well, actually, I wish that we were actually all in the same room because I think that would be a lot more enjoyable. But to the very greatest extent that we can, I hope that you all will consider this to be a dialogue, and I hope that you will start peppering Roger and Ann using the Q&A function. Don't be shy. And I think these kinds of exchanges are much more robust and satisfying for everybody if they actually are exchanges instead of just one-way flows of information. But Ann, to your question about what a career in public service has meant to me, maybe I'd start by giving a quick overview and then launching into maybe more of some personal ruminations on what a career in public service so far has meant to me. So as you heard from Roger's very kind introduction, I'm a lawyer. I have spent time both in private practice and in government service and public service. And I really did not see my career shaping up this way. It's turned out to be quite different from what I imagined it to be when I was in high school, when I was in college, when I was in law school. But I feel like it has been a series of real blessings. So I graduated from college not really knowing what I wanted to do. I thought that I wanted to go to law school, but I knew way too many people who had gone to law school because they didn't know what else they wanted to do. And they seemed unhappy because they did not have a real sense of what they wanted to do with their law degree. So instead of going directly to law school, I thought I better do something else first to see if I can season a little bit and mature a little bit. So I went to England. I studied for a year at Cambridge University, and then I came back and I got a job as a management consultant, which is another thing that young people do when they have no idea what they want to do with their lives. So I had a real job. I paid rent for a couple of years. And then I decided, you know what, I really do want to go to law school. Applied, was blessed to get into Stanford, had a wonderful time there. And after I graduated from law school, that's when my career in public service began. I was blessed to clerk for 2 federal judges. And those of you who are lawyers, you'll be familiar with the concept of clerkships. Those of you who are not law students, it's kind of like you have your law degree, you have your diploma in hand, and you are a baby lawyer, but you are not unleashed yet on the world to begin practicing law and representing clients. Instead, you go and you work for a judge who basically asks for your help in conducting research and doing some of the grunt work associated with helping the judge decide how to decide a case. So my first clerkship was in California for a judge on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. And then lightning struck and I got offered a job to work for Chief Justice Rehnquist in Washington, D.C. So I came out and did that. And I really thought that I would probably go to a law firm after that. But a friend of mine who had been working in the Justice Department one day out of the blue gave me a call and said, "Hey, Rob, I've had a great job at the U.S. Department of Justice in the criminal division working on terrorism related matters. And I'm about to get promoted to go do something else. You should apply for this job." And I thought that would be a zig instead of a zag. But I, on a whim, went and interviewed for the job. And that's how I ended up being introduced to and eventually working for someone named Christopher Wray, who then was at the Justice Department working as head of the criminal division and is now director of the FBI. So that is just one example of serendipity. I had no idea how important Chris Wray would be to my career and what a fabulous mentor he would be. But I liked him a ton and decided, yeah, I think I want my first job after I've finished these clerkships to be in public service with the Justice Department. And from then on, I've hopscotched back and forth between private practice and the Justice Department. I did the job for Chris Wray for about 1.5 years and then went to private practice. After a couple of years, I decided I want to be a federal prosecutor. So I was lucky enough that a gentleman named Rod Rosenstein, who was then the U.S. Attorney in Maryland and then served as Deputy Attorney General under President Trump, was hiring. He was looking for prosecutors. So I applied, was blessed to get the job, and then spent 6.5 years as a what they call a line prosecutor, an assistant U.S. attorney who's helping FBI, ATF, DEA agents investigate cases, try cases, do sentencing hearings, handle appeals, the whole gamut. At that point, I had had 3 children with my wife, so decided that it was time to do a stint in private practice. Went and practiced at a law firm for a few years. And then President Trump got elected and Rod Rosenstein was picked to be Deputy Attorney General. And again, out of the blue, Rod called me and said, "Would you like to work for me at the department?" And that's what led to the job that Roger talked about, Principal Associate Deputy Attorney General. It is, I think, the longest title in Washington, D.C. It is a real mouthful, but what it means is you spend pretty much all day with the Deputy Attorney General as he runs the Department of Justice. The Attorney General, of course, is at the very top of the department, but the Deputy Attorney General is the one who, kind of like a chief operating officer, he keeps the place running and humming along. Great job. And I can talk more about that later on. And then lightning struck. I was nominated to be the U.S. Attorney to succeed Rod as U.S. Attorney in Maryland. Had 3 terrific, amazing years in which I was privileged to serve as U.S. Attorney and spent a lot of time in Baltimore. And then last year made the jump to private practice. So that's an overview of the career, and happy to answer questions on that. As for what my time in public service has meant to me, I'll start on a personal note. So I am the son of immigrants. My parents came to this country back in '71. I was born in 1973, so I am a native-born, American-born U.S. citizen here. My parents were not. And my parents didn't talk a lot about their upbringing, but they grew up during the Korean War. And I occasionally would hear stories from them about how food was often pretty tough to come by during the Korean War. And my dad in particular would talk about how the American soldiers there would sometimes share food from their rations with little Korean kids running around. My mom's family was from what is now called North Korea, and their family fled southward during the Korean War conflict. So in a very real sense, if it weren't for the United States or the US military, I would not be here today. And the decision that my parents made to come to the US and have their children here and educated here, and to avail themselves of the many opportunities made available to me by being an American. As a little kid and as a teenager, it's pretty hard to think about that. But as you get older, you realize life is pretty good and pretty different from what it could have been if my parents hadn't made those choices. So thankfully, beginning in college, as I got exposed to more of what a career in the law could look like, it got through my thick skull that, it would be a good idea to spend some part of my career in public service, giving back in a very real sense to the country and the society that had given my parents and me and my family so much. So that's really what public service is at a very personal level for me. And then once you get into it, there's really nothing like it. When you are, for example, as a prosecutor, doing work, trying cases, thinking about, for example, victims of violent crime, family members of people who have suffered opioid overdoses, there really is nothing quite as satisfying as knowing that you are really doing tremendous good. You are trying to make better and improve the situation of folks in your community. It's a very special kind of public service. So let me pause there. I've been going on for a while.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was really terrific. What role did mentorship play in your success? And, second question related to it is, what recommendations do you have for students with regard to finding and working with a mentor? So mentorships for you personally and mentorships for students.
Yeah. Well, it's probably no surprise. I alluded to it in the overview of my career, but I can't overstate the importance of mentorship to my own career. I don't know if most listeners of the webinar right now are probably a little bit young to be familiar with the movie Forrest Gump, but it's about this character, Tom Hanks, who sort of stumbles his way through a series of tremendously historically consequential events. And in some ways, I feel a little bit like Forrest Gump. I got to work with someone like Chris Ray, who I was just blown away by and wanted to model in terms of what it was like to be a practicing lawyer and what it was like to be a good human being. And then, of course, to be hired by Rod Rosenstein, who also mentored me and then was kind enough to hire me not once, but twice when he had the authority to do that. Developing relationships with people who will take a chance on you, give you room to run, give you responsibility, make sure that you don't have too much room to run before making huge errors, but mostly modeling what it is, what is possible in terms of a career and in terms of public service. We as humans, I think it is harder to blaze trails that have not been trodden before. And so I think a very real role of a mentor is to say, hey, here's what I have done. You should think about maybe doing things similar to this. Or, you know what, I've accomplished a lot, but I haven't been able to do X. You should think about doing X. And so that's what I try to do in terms of interacting with younger associates, younger lawyers at Gibson Dunn, AUSAs, assistant U.S. attorneys in the U.S. Attorney's Office, whom I hired and saw a lot of potential in. I think a big role of a mentor is to say, you've got great raw material here. Here's what you need to do in order to polish and refine it. And don't be satisfied there. Always keep your eyes higher on the horizon and always be thinking about what else is possible. And I got to say, a lot of the conversations, and probably people who mentored me, thought, you're not aiming high enough. You're not being ambitious enough. You're underestimating yourself. And so a lot of the conversations I have with younger lawyers is, you're selling yourself short. Why don't you apply for that? Why don't you make the call? Why don't you think about X, Y, or Z? If you don't do it, then someone who is maybe less talented than you, just as talented than you, but who had the gumption to throw their hat in the ring and apply for something, they're going to go get that thing that you think would be a cool job or a cool opportunity. So don't be a wimp. Go for it. And I think that is a real. It is important to find those people. So in terms of how to find mentors, I think it is a combination of things. One is you never ever know when a mentor is available to you and might be a very consequential person in your life. And so I like to think that every single thing that you are doing, personally and professionally, is important. Demanding excellence and the very high standards for yourself is important, not just for the personal satisfaction you get, but you never know who's going to be watching. Even if someone who observes that, like, wow, that person really turns out terrific work product every single time, whether it's a 10-pager, a 20-pager, or a 1-pager, it is spot on and excellent every single time. Those people can become mentors. They can become people who generate buzz about you and talk about how awesome you are to other people who hear about that and say, I want to get in on that. I want me some of that person. And then those persons might end up being your mentors. And I think the other thing to think about is you don't necessarily need to be passive and wait for these opportunities to come to you. I think when you're on the starting end of your career, folks can seem a little intimidating. Within the context of a law firm, I think associates often say, well, that's scary. Why would I go knock on that partner's door and ask if they want to go to coffee, or chat about what they're working on, or ask, do you have any cases that look like this that are going to be coming in the door every once in a while? And my answer back to these younger lawyers, especially summer associates who are currently in law school, is always, they're just people. They may be busy, but if you send them an email, if you stop by, they would love it. I guarantee you that, all right, there might be one person out of 100 who would say, that's annoying, I don't want to talk to you. But the 99 out of the 100 are going to say, absolutely. Thank you for knowing about me. Thank you for knowing about my career and what it is I do. Thank you for taking an interest in me. And thank you for investing 15, 20, 30 minutes in wanting to have coffee with me. That would be great. And taking the initiative, seizing the reins of your own career, rather than wondering, is a mentor going to wash up in the waves that wash over me, or am I going to go out and get it? So we're all people. We're all watching the news, reading the paper, on social media. If you come across someone that you think would be a cool mentor, why not reach out to them? And maybe you have coffee with them and you think, oh, that was horrible. It was really awkward and we didn't really have anything to talk about. And that person is never going to want to talk to me again. And I don't want to talk to that person again. But just the opposite could happen. That you might have a cosmic, molecular level connection with that person, and you're going to have a mentor for life. But if you didn't reach out, you will never know. You're on mute, Roger.
Thank you very much. That is really incredible advice. Wanted to take a moment for all of our students in the room today, just to mention, we make it a little easier on you here at UBalt as an opportunity to be mentored. I have to give a shout out to the Quad S Student Success and Student Support Division. They have a mentoring program. If you're unaware of it, go to the website and you can sign up to get a mentor of a faculty member, an alum, and I've served as a mentor for a student, and it's a great opportunity. But the point that you made too, Rob, is that the opportunity later to get a career mentor in your profession or to learn about a profession is yet another opportunity that is so important. But couldn't resist mentioning the UBALT program because it's a good one.
That's great advice about mentorship, and I love the line about "Don't be a wimp." Go out and get it. That's perfect. You served as a law clerk for William Rehnquist, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Can you tell our students what that was like as a young attorney working for Justice Rehnquist?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. The first thought that comes to mind is getting the opportunity to clerk for a Supreme Court justice is really like being struck by lightning, because there are so many wonderfully qualified, talented, charismatic lawyers graduating from law school every year or finishing their initial clerkships. And it's kind of like being in a, it's kind of like being the one Powerball that gets picked up out of that vat. And it is a very special honor. So it's a year during which you work incredibly hard. For me, it was mostly motivated by fear because I did not want to screw up. I wanted to do the level best that I could and not let my justice down. It's a year where you are surrounded by other extraordinarily talented, smart, and driven young lawyers. I am confident, I know for a fact that I was not the smartest person clerking for the Supreme Court that year. I think I was among the hardest working, but that is a dynamic where you've got a lot of young people who think quite highly of themselves, and so you try to figure out how to navigate the egos there. But I suppose that's part of life generally. It was quite heady stuff to think to yourself, I'm going to be helping a justice of the Supreme Court go about his task of deciding these cases. And the thing about the Supreme Court is they don't hear anything that they don't want to. The Supreme Court, they operate by, it's a court of certiorari, which is a fancy Latin word for we hear what we want. And so if you want the Supreme Court to hear your case, you have to file a petition. You're going to say, hey, here's why my case is worthy of your time. I think they hear about 60, 70 cases a year. So it's a pretty small number out of all the many cases in the federal legal system. And they hear some stuff from state courts too. And so Chief Justice Rehnquist had 3 law clerks. Every justice was entitled to 4. And Chief Justice Rehnquist was actually entitled to 5 because he was chief and he had extra administrative responsibilities. He chose to hire 3 law clerks because he liked to play tennis with his law clerks. And so if he had 3 law clerks, then that meant it's perfect for doubles. Someone plays with the chief. So
back to being human.
Yes, yeah. So he loved tennis. He's quite good at it. And once a week, every week, we would head down to Haynes Point in Washington, D.C. They're public courts. They're not fancy. They're public courts. And we would hit the tennis ball around. I will say that one clerk, I didn't know that this choice would remain throughout the entire clerkship. So I volunteered, but one clerk was responsible for driving the Chief Justice and his fellow law clerks to Haynes Point. It's not a very long drive. It is still within the District of Columbia. But I will tell you that I drove very, very carefully and very, very slowly with the Chief Justice of the United States riding shotgun in my Subaru because I did not want to get in an accident and cause any injury to him. But those are some of my fondest memories. He also, because he had been on the court for decades at that point, he really knew the stuff inside and out. That's not to say that there were any easy cases up at the Supreme Court. If a case ended up at the Supreme Court, it's because there was something controversial or hard about it, or courts below had disagreed about it. But he knew the stuff. And I remember very vividly one occasion on which we were talking about a particular question presented by one of the briefs. And he looked at me and he said, you know what, I think that there was an opinion some time ago that addressed this issue. He said, pull down that book, and he pointed to the bookshelf. He said, pull down that volume of Supreme Court opinions. And he gave me the number, and I pulled it down. And he said, turn to page, whatever it was, 48, and look at the upper left of the page. And I looked at it, and lo and behold, he was right. There was a passage there in a prior opinion that was exactly on point. So I have no idea if that was all set up, if he planned that in advance and wanted to wow me. I think that is a 1% likelihood of that being the case. I think 99% likely is that he actually just knew it, because he was not a showboater. He didn't need to prove himself to anybody, but I was pretty floored by the fact that that he was able to have that level of recall among all the many, many volumes of opinions that were on the bookshelf against his wall.
Gosh, that is absolutely amazing. It's a great description that you got to drive him to. And I have a related question to working for Justice Rehnquist. What are some of the most significant cases you got to work on in that year?
Yeah, so it was a pretty consequential term. It was in some respects not as controversial as the one before. So I clerked in 2002 to 2003. The term before, which was from 2001 to 2002, was the term where the court heard Bush versus Gore.
Oh, wow.
And that was the contested presidential election. So it was, there were still a lot of raw emotions surrounding the Supreme Court and among the law clerk cadre from that prior year. But the law clerks from that year went out, and we came in, and we had a pretty consequential term of our own. Apropos of the current moment, actually, I think some folks may know that on Halloween, at the end of this month, the Supreme Court will be hearing oral argument on two related cases addressing affirmative action in college admissions, the Harvard University case and the University of North Carolina case. And a lot of the briefing around that addresses particular questions decided in the University of Michigan affirmative action cases. The lead one was Grutter versus Bollinger. Bollinger was the president of the University of Michigan back then. And so that was the last time the Supreme Court addressed affirmative action in university admissions. And that happened to be the term that I was clerking. So Justice O'Connor was on the court at that point, and in her concurring opinion, she opined back in 2002 to 2003 that in 25 years, we believe that affirmative action will no longer be necessary. So it's not quite been 25 years since then, but it's getting kind of close. And so we will see what the Supreme Court decides on revisiting this issue. During that term, it was also one during which the court considered the case of Lawrence v. Texas, and it addressed the question of whether consensual homosexual sexual activity could be banned, could be rendered criminal by state statute, and Texas had done that. And in the Lawrence v. Texas case, the court struck that down as unconstitutional. So that was also a pretty closely followed case. Another case that Supreme Court watchers really noted pretty closely was the case of Virginia versus Black. That was a cross-burning case in which an individual had been convicted under a Virginia statute that made it illegal to burn crosses. And the court decided that under the First Amendment, that was protected speech that could not be rendered criminal. At the oral argument, Justice Thomas, who before that argument had for years and years and years not asked any questions at oral argument, his deep baritone voice intoned a question. And for people in the audience who had not heard Justice Thomas speak from the bench for a long, long time, some folks nearly fell out of their chairs. So I remember being there and seeing that happen, and remembering it was pretty impactful. So there were other cool cases that I remember being heard that term, but those are some of the standouts.
Those are some amazing cases, and I used to teach a few of them back when I was a political science professor. So wow, very cool.
Yeah.
And steeped to history. You were the 48th U.S. Attorney for the District of Maryland. Can you tell our students a little bit about the role of the U.S. Attorney?
Sure, happy to. So the U.S. Attorney, as Roger mentioned during his introduction, is the chief federal law enforcement officer for the district. So all around the country, there are 94 U.S. attorneys' offices. There's 93 U.S. attorneys. Guam and the Virgin Islands share one. So there's 93 U.S. attorneys, and the president has the job of nominating U.S. attorneys, and the Senate confirms folks to fill these offices. And so what their job really is to do is to lead the U.S. attorney's office. And so part of that is criminal, obviously. They oversee investigations and prosecutions of violations of federal criminal law, but there's also an important civil part of it. So part of it can be defensive, where if someone wants to sue the federal government in the state of Maryland, for example, a U.S. Postal Service truck hits you, damages your car, or hits you and hurts you, and you have to go to the hospital, and you want to sue the federal government in order to get damages. Lawyers in the U.S. Attorney's Office defend the U.S. government. Or if U.S. Attorney's Office wants to take a civil enforcement action, in other words, to say, hey, you're breaking the law, but we don't want to send you to jail. We want to make you pay a civil penalty, a money penalty. Those are civil actions, and the U.S. Attorney has lawyers in his office that also address those types of civil cases. So it is a fabulous job. Primarily because of the caliber of the lawyers that come and work in that office. It is an office, and I often say this to people who are applying for the jobs. For every one vacancy, we receive at least 10 applications of very talented lawyers. And in the Baltimore, D.C. area, there's just a lot of lawyers here. So we have the luxury of really picking through some amazing applications. And I always tell applicants, I was told applicants when I was U.S. Attorney, if you are at a law firm, if you are working in private practice, you are going to take a serious, serious hit financially. I wish I could pay you more, but I can't. Congress allocates X amount for the U.S. Department of Justice and a subset of X for paying AUSAs. I wish I could pay you more, but I can't. So the rewards are psychic here. And it is very inspiring that so many people turn down riches and relatively, there is a significant opportunity cost in terms of dollars to applying to be a federal prosecutor and working there for a significant period of time. So you get these fabulously talented, really inspiring, super smart people coming and working. They're signing up for more work and less pay. That's the deal. But still, we get lots and lots of terrific applicants, and it was an honor to work alongside people who had that combination of skill and talent and civic mindedness and commitment to public service, which is exactly why we are here today. And the cases that we handled were challenging. It falls to the U.S. Attorney's Office to tackle all kinds of threats, and those can range from international terrorism cases, domestic terrorism cases, hate crimes, violent crime, opioids, child exploitation, child pornography, human trafficking. It's really a very sobering overview of the landscape of the many ways in which human beings can do harm to one another. And so it's very serious work, it's very challenging work. And the courts and the public and the juries and the press demand a lot of us. It's very important, complicated work, and it has to be done exactly right, because you're talking on the criminal side about people's liberty. You want to put someone behind bars, that's a lot. That's a lot at stake, and you've got to do it very, very well and to the exacting standards required by the law. So that's a quick overview of what the U.S. Attorney's Office does.
Thanks so much. What were your most significant accomplishments in the U.S. District Attorney's Office? U.S. Attorney's Office, sorry.
I think the logical place to start is with the cases. I was blessed to live in interesting times as U.S. Attorney. Some of the matters that the office handled while I was U.S. Attorney included, of course, public corruption cases. We handled the prosecution of the former mayor, Catherine Pugh. the prosecution of the former Baltimore Police Commissioner, Darrell D'Souza, a number of sitting members of the Maryland General Assembly. And that has always been a really significant, important part of the Maryland U.S. Attorney's Office's diet and remit. There are certain states within our great country that have more colorful histories when it comes to public corruption than others. Illinois comes to mind with a number of their governors going to prison. Maryland, of course, has Spiro T. Agnew, the former vice president and the former governor of Maryland, in the Rogues Gallery. But Maryland also is a state where, there has been work on the public corruption side for the U.S. Attorney's Office to do. There's also been, on the domestic terrorism side, there was the prosecution of members of the Base, which was a white supremacist hate violent organization where some very, very bad folks were on their way to hurt innocent people based on white supremacist beliefs. And so that was a tense investigation to make sure that we in the FBI were able to intercede before any harm was done by those particular defendants. International terrorism, we prosecuted a gentleman who stole a truck inspired by ISIS. He had ISIS videos on his cell phone. And what he wanted to do was to go to National Harbor in Prince George's County, take his stolen truck and run over as many innocent people as he possibly could. There have been tragedies like that in Europe, but he wanted to do that in the United States, in Maryland too. So the case, I could go on and on and on. I will spare you a detailed recitation of all the cases, but extraordinarily proud of the work. And the job of the U.S. Attorney, of course, is to make sure that the prosecutors, law enforcement officers who are investigating those cases and prosecuting them are supported, have what they need, and understand the importance of doing the job right. But I'm also, apart from the cases, I think, actually, Rod Rosenstein gave me this piece of advice. He said, Rob, the most important thing you will do as U.S. Attorney is hiring, because you may not be U.S. Attorney for very long, but the folks that you hire could be there for years and years and years and decades. And some of the people who were among the greats who have recently retired and left the office, they endured. They taught and mentored legions of young prosecutors that came after them. And so I took every single hiring decision very, very seriously, because it is consequential. Those decisions have consequences for a long, long time. And the trick is not just hiring good people, but retaining them. How do you hang on to good people? We've already talked about the fact that I couldn't shower them with money. So it's got to be other rewards. Do they feel supported? Do they feel the warm fuzzies? Do they feel inspired by the work? And the part of the role of a U.S. Attorney, I think, is to make sure that that level of morale and job satisfaction and camaraderie are vibrant within the office, to make sure that people aren't constantly thinking, you know what, I could be getting paid a lot more elsewhere. And I'm not sure that this public service thing is really doing it for me. You want to keep people happy and engaged and inspired as much as possible. And to that end, I can't forget, I can't believe I admitted, COVID-19. I had no idea that a once in a century pandemic was going to be visited on the world during my time as U.S. Attorney. So, the thing is, a lot of things shut down during the pandemic, but crime did not. So you had crimes going on, and my hat's always off to the law enforcement officers, including the Baltimore Police Department officers, who they didn't get to stay home. They had to be out there pre-vaccine, us having our arms completely around. What is this? How bad is it going to be? And you had officers out there on the beat, while visions of people on ventilators being totally devastated by the COVID-19 pandemic, loomed large in TV coverage. So the thing was, obviously we couldn't do jury trials, but there is a construct in law where if you want to charge someone with a federal crime, you've got to have a grand jury return an indictment to do it. The U.S. Attorney can't just, You can charge someone by complaint, but that doesn't do the trick for good, for longer than a finite period. You got to have a grand jury. How do you gather a grand jury in a room at the courthouse where they usually meet when the courthouse is closed because of COVID-19? So that's just one example of how do we keep the machinery of justice moving during a COVID-19 lockdown. So very proud of the way that we were able to navigate that and work with the defense bar and the bench in order to make sure things kept moving, that the entire system didn't screech to a halt. And then finally, I really made a priority of reaching out to audiences and constituencies that I don't think people typically associate with the U.S. Attorney. I continued Rod Rosenstein's focus on reentry. So we had, and I hope the office still has someone whose job it is to work with prisoners who are finishing up their prison terms, and this is in state and federal facilities, to say, hey, you're coming to the end of your prison term. We want to equip you with the training, the information, the knowledge to make sure that you don't end up back in prison. What can we do to make sure that you can find a job, you can get an ID, you can get insurance, so that you end up saying that my time in prison is behind me instead of having another stint ahead of me. So we focused very much on that. I worked with fellow prosecutors to try to, we would work to find groups of people, we'd work with the police departments and say, all right, who do you think is the likeliest in this community to end up getting arrested with a gun illegally and might end up in federal court for the first time? We would identify those groups of usually about 20 to 25 young men, I think they were always men, and we would get them in a room, and I would get it in front of them, and I would say, it's a privilege to be here to speak to you. I hope I never, ever, ever see you in a federal courtroom, because if you have, it means that I have failed, that this conversation I'm having with you has failed, and I would lay out the facts for them. I would say, here's the 3 most recent federal firearm prosecutions that we did. This gentleman was from this neighborhood. Here's how old he is, and here's how much time he's facing, to try to get them to understand the consequences of having a gun on them in Baltimore City. And then finally, I went, this was really fun. I appeared on the Larry Young show. My understanding was that U.S. attorneys did not typically go on his show, but he has a really vast listenership. A ton of people listen to him, and I wanted to have a conversation with him. I wanted to hear what questions he had for me, and I wanted to answer honestly. And so trying to expand the bounds of whom the U.S. attorney was speaking to and interacting with, I took efforts to do, and I hope that is continuing now.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. A lot of our students are non-attorneys, are not in law school. We have students in our forensic studies program and criminal justice and other types of non-attorney programs. Yeah. What types of careers are available for students in the U.S. Attorney's Office that are not attorneys?
Yeah, great question. And these are really the unsung heroes of the office. These are not people who have law degrees, who end up making the arguments before juries or getting yelled at by judges, but they are critically important to the office, and without whom they could not run. You mentioned forensic technicians. We don't directly employ forensic scientists or evidence technicians in the U.S. Attorney's Office. Those are typically employed by separate divisions within police departments or by federal law enforcement agencies like the FBI, the DEA, the ATF. But we work with them very, very closely, and the rigor that they have to apply to what they are doing. I mentioned this before, the stakes are very, very high, and juries pay real attention to forensic analysis. If the results of a fingerprint analysis, a ballistics analysis, all of the different magical ways in which DNA analysis, my goodness, what an incredible advancement. Those can be critically important to supporting prosecution and eventually doing justice. But within the U.S. Attorneys itself, we've got communications specialists, public information officers whose job it is to actually educate the public about what we are doing. A lot of the time it relates to press releases when there's a particular indictment or a conviction won by the office. Those press releases are prepared. But an important part of it is also the proactive side, to reach out to different audiences, to print media, to TV, to other audiences, nonprofits, schools, to say, hey, can we set up an interview? Can you, we'd like to take this opportunity not to wait for a press conference where a microphone is being stuck in the U.S. Attorney's face or the camera is being trained outside the courthouse, but in a more natural, proactive setting. We do have other kinds of analysts, smart people who know how to manipulate and crunch data to help our law enforcement efforts. The fact is, there's always going to be more crime than we can investigate and prosecute. So the trick is, how do you figure out how to get the most bang for the buck? And a terrific unit within that I was able to stand up during my time as U.S. Attorney is a group of analysts who gather all kinds of violent crime data, gang-related activity data, and to crunch it all and to figure out, hey, here's what's going on here. This neighborhood crew is beefing with this gang. This is not a new conflict. You know, they fought a decade ago. It kind of died down when some people went to prison, but now it's flaring up again. And we think that if we focus our prosecution efforts on that particular group, intercede before a shooting can occur or a retaliation for a prior shooting can occur, we think that we can really reduce the number of shootings and the level of violence in that particular neighborhood. That is the kind of smart analysis that helps us not just work harder, but work smarter and figuring out where are we going to reduce violence levels, increase safety the most through our investigative prosecution efforts. And then, you know, if anyone is interested in a career in law enforcement, I can't wax poetic enough about the talent and the bravery of people who are in the police departments and the federal law enforcement agencies that we are privileged as lawyers to work with every single day. It's not just bravery, but it's also ingenuity. People coming up with really smart ways of figuring out how do we figure out what happened here. And then finally, there's the cadre of assistants and paralegals who help us navigate oftentimes the tons and tons of evidence, documents, electronic discovery that we have to do in order to do the job right.
Thank you.
Gosh, thanks so much. Really appreciated. You're now an attorney in private practice with Gibson Dunn. Can you talk a little bit about your transition from the public to the private? Differences, excitement, not?
I've really enjoyed every single part of my career. I know there are people who really enjoy careers where they're doing one thing for the entire duration. They're working for one company, or they're in the private sector and they're practicing that kind of law and they're getting super deep and detailed in their expertise, but that's all they do. Or people who have been in the U.S. Attorney's Office and have been career prosecutors since they were little baby AUSAs, and they're going to keep doing that till they retire. So there's all kinds of ways to develop a satisfying career. For me, maybe it's just I have a short attention span, but I really like the fact that I've been able to go back and forth. There are aspects of it that I find, you know, there's pros and cons to everything. It is hard to replicate or match some of the particular kinds of satisfaction and adrenaline rushes that you get as a prosecutor trying a case. During my stint as U.S. Attorney, I wanted to make sure I tried a case. So I tried one during COVID-19 with face mask and face shield and plexiglass all up around the courtroom. But here's what I'll say. I think having been a prosecutor makes me a better defense attorney, and having been a defense attorney makes me a better prosecutor. Right now in private practice, I find it extraordinarily useful when I'm defending clients, representing clients, to say, if I were the prosecutor looking at you, here's what I would be thinking. So here's strategically what we need to figure out how to address. When I was a prosecutor, interacting with defendants and defense counsel, it was very helpful for me to remember what it felt like to be working with an individual client who was terrified, who had no idea what was coming down the pike, who was contemplating prison time, trying to navigate discussions with his family, and just dealing with a tremendous amount of stress and uncertainty as to very significant, arguably the most significant decisions in one's life. And I think maybe that brought a bit of humanity really to decisions, and make it can, and I think, and it does make prosecutors think longer, think harder, think more carefully about the decisions that they are making, making sure that a search warrant is completely up to snuff, making sure that the evidence is really there before recommending that a defendant be charged by indictment. And so, both sides are extraordinarily satisfying, and allow me as a lawyer to expand my comfort zone. I will never, ever, ever know everything there is to know. I'll never know everything there is to know about being a lawyer. There's always more. There's always areas or questions where I think, well, I've not really dealt with that before. I better research that. I better ask a colleague about that. And that's one of the great things about being a lawyer. I suppose there might be some people who have the level of hubris to think that they pretty much know it all. I can't ever imagine approaching that point. You're always learning.
Thanks. Speaking of your training as a lawyer and how it transitions, you're in private practice now, but you're still in public service as a member of the Board of Regents. Can you talk a little bit about what the Board of Regents does and what you as a regent do? And then from our law school dean, Ron Weiss, how does your legal training and experience influence your service on the board?
Yeah, great question. So there might be many folks in the audience that have no idea what you're talking about. Well, what is the Board of Regents? And so let me start, I guess, with basics. So there is, of course, the University of Baltimore, but there are other public universities within the state of Maryland. They are united under a system called the University System of Maryland. It includes UVault, College Park, Towson, University of Maryland Eastern Shore. I'm not going to rattle them all off, but they are all part of a system that is governed. Each campus, of course, has its own president, has its own deans, leadership, budget, and they make plenty of decisions on their own, because each individual university and each individual student body has their own strategy and situation and circumstances. But the university system really gathers them up and tries to look at them from a whole in terms of governance. So part of the university system has a chancellor, Jay Perman, and his job is to really provide the strategic vision and guiding insight as to where do we go for the next 5, 10, 20, 30 years. And working with him is the Board of Regents, which is a fancy name for really, I suppose in terms of a public company, you would think of it as a board of directors. So it's people who are drawn from all kinds of different walks of life and experience to grapple with basic questions of governance. So what do I mean by that? What would it mean, for example, for students in the audience? At the very highest level, it's the strategic plan, it's the vision. What do we want the university within the University System of Maryland to be? What is our mission? What's our charter? Do we want to be this kind of set of universities, or do we want to do that kind? How do we want to fulfill our goal of making life better in Maryland? Because there's a lot of different ways to skin that cat. A lot of that comes down to money. Here's our pot of money. How are we going to invest it? Because everyone would always like more money for facilities or new initiatives or new professorships or new programs. And it falls to the board to consider all those in concert with the recommendations of the presidents of the individual universities to figure out what's the most prudent way to do it. That's parceling out the money. There's also the question of getting the money. So we're involved in working with the governor to try to get approval from the Maryland legislature, the General Assembly, because they're the ones ultimately, these are taxpayer dollars. These are public universities. So these are tax dollars that ultimately get appropriated, granted to the University System of Maryland. So it's those kinds of things. And during the pandemic, the Board of Regents was very involved in trying to figure out, how do we make this work? how do we keep students safe while still making sure that they get educated?
Gosh, thanks so much. Really appreciated. And it's a very appreciated role, to say the least. And but it's also one that not a lot of folks know about. And I always talk about boards with my students, and always like to in the future with students. Board service, commission service is something that is really, really important and really helpful to your career as well. It's a great way to learn. And even if you're 22 right now and thinking you may not be able to serve on a board or commission, you're probably wrong about that. Cities and towns and counties have a host of openings to serve the public and your communities in that way. And it's a great way to get experience. So I just wanted to mention that. But the Board of Regents is one that you probably won't start with immediately.
Although, Roger, I should make sure that everyone knows that there are
regents.
actually student regents.
Yes, thank you.
And those folks come to meetings, they contribute, they ask questions, they provide, knowledge. They provide the student perspective, which is really, really important to consider. It can't just be, people thinking about things from, 30,000 feet.
Thank you for that correction. We've had several student regents from the University of Baltimore, and so appreciate it very much. And final question for you or for me?
I have one final fun question. The question is, was tennis proficiency a job requirement to be a clerk for Supreme Court justice?
Oh, that's really funny. So when you apply for a Supreme Court clerkship, the custom is you apply to all 9 justices. And sometimes there's more than 9 because some of the retired justices still have an office in the Supreme Court building and they still hire a law clerk. So you apply to everybody at once. But the advice was always, if you play tennis, put it on your resume because that will catch the chief's eye. So I definitely had tennis on my resume. And one of my co-clerks had not played before. So she got an interview with the chief anyhow. The interview was going great. She relayed this to me all secondhand, but she said the interview was going great. And the chief said, so do you play tennis? And the law clerk, my fellow law clerk, said, unfortunately, I don't, chief. And she thought, oh, great, I'm sunk. There's no way I get the job now. And the chief says, well, would you be willing to take lessons before the start of your clerkship? And she, of course, answered the right way, which was, absolutely, I would love to take tennis lessons. So she learned how to play in a jiffy, and she got the job. So Roger, I have a bit more time if there's demand for me, but if everyone is signing off and going off to dinner or drinks, then we don't need to prolong this. But I do have some more time.
Oh, terrific. Well, let's see. I was looking at some of the questions online that we had. We have a student, Alicia Ryan, who is a politics, international affairs major. And she was talking and she was really interested in what you were saying about giving back to your community. And she says, or asks, as a lawyer, how do you feel COVID affected public service from the lens that you could see it from, or from others?
Yeah, I think it's a really, really good question. I think the short answer is it hasn't been good because particularly in public service, where so much of the impact that you have and so much of the motivation is interpersonal connection. Look, don't get me wrong, I think Zoom is magical. It is amazing, and I'm so grateful for it. And it has allowed us to do things that we never thought possible, because I really personally hate phone conferences because people are always tripping over each other. Zoom allows us to give a little bit of body language, and when someone's about to speak, so you don't cut them off. So I think it's fabulous. But when it comes to the kinds of sensitive things that we are working in public service, it's not just dollars and cents. It's not just numbers. These are human consequences and human emotions. It's much harder to do when you're not in person. And part of that, within the context of the law, some courts around the country toyed with having jury trials remotely via Zoom. I think I heard about some state courts in New Jersey grappling with it. but that never really seriously got traction on the federal level because there was the understanding, and it was really largely unspoken, that, on behalf of the federal judges and I think prosecutors and defense lawyers too, look, if you are talking about consequences as serious as federal prison time, you gotta have jurors who are looking witnesses in the eye, in the same room. It is so much harder to gauge credibility and get a measure of someone's how they present over Zoom, that there was a real understanding that we are going to have to wait a while until we get this COVID thing figured out for in-person jury trials to resume. And I think that was the right call, because look, if it were my butt in the defendant's seat, I would want to say, yeah, I want the fairest trial possible. And for me, the fairest trial possible is someone where I can look jurors in the eye, they can look me in the eye, and they can do the same with witnesses. So I think that's just one reflection of how important interpersonal reaction is. Thank goodness for vaccines. Thank goodness for the advances that we've made. And let's hope we can put this really, really behind us as soon as possible. I don't think we're quite there yet. But I tell you, at the beginning of this, I was pretty scared. I think a lot of people were scared that this was not going to go away anytime soon.
Thank you. We have one question from Javon Mangum. And Javon wants to know, based on your diverse career lens, what do you think should be done to tackle the root causes of crime and violence in the city, and what's missing?
Yeah, it's a great question, and one that humans have been grappling with for decades, centuries. It doesn't make, and I've said this publicly before, it does not make any sense to have a one-sided, one-faceted approach to crime, and particularly violent crime. Cannot just level up on policing and prosecuting and try to pack prisons as full as possible and think that that is going to give you a long-term solution. And it might feel good. It might be a fix in a very short-term way, but if you want to have long-term vibrancy, you've got to be smart about figuring out ways to attack the problem from the other end. And again, I think a lot of people think, well, that's an odd view for a prosecutor to have, but that's like saying, and I guess that means that you regard a prosecutor as someone who's like a hammer, like a hammer sees a nail and just wants to hammer it. That's the only thing they can do. But that is, I don't think, the right viewpoint to take of it. There are, of course, much larger societal ills and issues. And not to wade into a political thicket here, but I think a microcosm, or one example of this, is the whole issue of squeegee kids. Why are those kids out there on street corners with squeegees? Because they're trying to earn a living. They're not trying to annoy people. They're trying to make money. They're trying to get gainful employment. And so unless we figure out ways to provide jobs for people to make a living, to support themselves and their families, human beings are survivors. And if there are criminal means of surviving and feeding yourself and your family, then people are going to avail themselves of those means. You've got to figure out how to make non-criminal ways of supporting yourself more attractive than the criminal means. And that means no silver bullets. That means long-term investment in education and industry and companies that are going to provide good paying jobs. And I hear myself, and I sound like a sort of canned political ad, but that's just how it is. You've got to make non-crime much more attractive to crime. And then the other thing is recidivism. I talked about it with respect to reentry education programs to make sure people who have done time and are getting out don't go back in. I think a critical part of that is, for example, prison education. And there are folks at University of Baltimore who are critically involved in those efforts. I think it's Professor Cantora. She is really one of the national pioneers in trying to go in and say, all right, there is a population within the Maryland state prison system who doesn't want to be there, and is eager for the opportunity to get educated, to earn a credential, to earn a degree, to get the training and the knowledge so that they can come out and not return to what landed them in prison, but to go get a job and leave all that behind them. And so there is demand there, and University of Baltimore is part of the effort to meet that demand.
Thank you for mentioning Dr. Cantora. We're really proud of her in the College of Public.
Should be.
Affairs. She won the USM Regents Award for Distinguished Service for that program, and we just granted her our own Distinguished Service Award yesterday. So
It's fabulous. I didn't know that. That's great.
Very timely, and she and her team are doing great work, as you mentioned. Thank you for those answers. Really appreciated.
Of course.
Well, I was really wanted to say, first of all, here how much we appreciate and thank you for joining us in this special series that we've had. And I wanted to say sincerely that you've made it very special. We really enjoyed your time with us today, with our students. Your vision of public service is exactly as we hope to teach, and I know that it was inspiring. I also wanted to say you're a real delight to interview. So thank you for your time.
Nice of you to say.
I'm aware that you have other commitments this evening, and I didn't want to keep you. We could have asked you questions all night, to be honest.
Well, it's been a real pleasure and an honor. I hope, I know I got something out of this, but I really hope, more importantly, that the people who have tuned in have gotten something out of this. So thank you for the opportunity, and I appreciate everyone's time and attention.
Thank you. It was a real honor and a pleasure.
Look forward to having you on campus soon, and have a great night. Really appreciate it. And thanks to everyone who attended today. We really appreciate your being part of this series, and there's more to come in November and December. So be on the lookout.
Thanks, everybody.
Good night.
Bye-bye.